Hey guys, tonight we are wandering into the shimmering heat of the Nile Valley, where time isn't measured by smartphones buzzing in your pocket, but by shadows stretching across stone and sand. You can imagine yourself standing barefoot on a sun-baked courtyard, watching the great orb above you slide slowly west, while a carefully placed stone marker tells you whether it's morning work time or afternoon rest. The Egyptians didn't rush. They didn't need glowing alarms set to 6:45 a.m. sharp. They had the sun. And if the sun happened to hide behind a cloud, well, the day was simply a little more mysterious. You probably won't survive this system if you're the kind of person who panics when your Wi-Fi router takes 3 seconds to connect, but the Egyptians, they managed just fine. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening right now, drop your location and the local time in the comments. I always find it strangely soothing to know who's drifting off where in the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The earliest sundials were really just glorified sticks stuck into the ground. Gnomons, if you want the fancy term. The shadow cast by the stick shifted as the sun crossed the sky, and by marking those movements in stone, Egyptians could roughly divide the day. And when I say roughly, I mean don't expect a catch of 2:17 appointment with Pharaoh's tax collector. If the shadow pointed vaguely in the right direction, that was the hour. A mainstream fact you might find surprising is that these sundials date as far back as the 1500s BCE, centuries before many civilizations even thought about carving their own lunch knives. But here's a quirky tidbit. One of the earliest portable sundials discovered in the Valley of the Kings was small enough to fit in your hand. Imagine ancient Egyptians on the go, like, oh, I can't forget my time stick before heading to the temple. It's almost like slipping your phone in your pocket, except it only works when the sun agrees. Historians still argue whether the Egyptians truly wanted precision or whether they just needed a general sense of get to work when the shadow is here, eat when it's there, and sleep when it disappears altogether. Some claim they were meticulous, aligning monuments with solstices. Others think they simply liked the drama of the sun lining up with temple doorways, more spiritual spectacle than scientific accuracy. As you stand there in your sandals, you can picture artisans chiseling small grooves into a stone sundial, the marks faint but meaningful. The heat presses down, but you lean against a wall, watching the shadow crawl like a lazy cat across the lines. Each movement feels imperceptible, but if you stare long enough, you see the day shifting, the hours dripping like honey. You might even chuckle. Imagine an ancient student trying to explain being late to class. Sorry, the shadow didn't move fast enough. It's a hard excuse to argue with. You trace with your finger how morning begins shorter, then the day stretches, and by evening the shadows are long enough to swallow the city. It feels strangely soothing, this rhythm that doesn't care about your deadlines. You can almost feel your own pulse slow to match the creeping pace of the sun. Sometimes sundials were carved into temple walls, great slabs etched with lines pointing to noon and dusk. Picture yourself stepping into the cool shade, tracing those lines with your eyes, knowing that priests once stood where you are, waiting for the right angle of light to signal their rituals. That little slice of sunlight might decide when bread offerings were placed before a god statue. Imagine the stress. Oh no, we offered too soon. The shadow was an inch short. Yet, somehow the gods didn't seem to mind. And while the sun sets the hours for the living, you also notice the tomb walls echoing that same obsession. The dead were meant to carry the knowledge of time into eternity. Our gods, painted in sequence, marching across the walls of burial chambers. Each deity represented a fragment of the night, so that even in death, time was sliced into manageable portions, kind of like setting up your eternal sleep playlist. The desert air is still, except for a faint breeze. and you can almost hear the scrape of stone on stone as workers carved another dial into place. You squint at the horizon and realize you're not watching minutes, you're watching existence itself unfold, measured not in seconds, but in shadows. It's a system that forces patience, reminding you that time is less about precision and more about presence. And as you let the thought settle, you lean back against the warm stone and allow the shadows to creep just a little further, knowing that next section of this story is waiting with the soft dripping of water clocks. But for now, you're still here, basking in the sun's steady rhythm.
The heat of the courtyard fades now, replaced by a cool chamber where the sound is not of footsteps crunching across sand, but of water dripping, one slow bead at a time. You're standing beside a tall jar, hollowed carefully by hands long gone, filled almost to the brim with Nile water. It's dim here, no sunlight to cast shadows, but the Egyptians had no intention of losing track of time just because the sun took a break. Welcome to the soothing, almost hypnotic world of the clepsydra, the water clock. At first glance, it looks like any vessel you might drink from, but peer closely and you'll notice tiny holes carved near its bottom. Drop by drop, the water slides out into another container, and each stage of the descent was measured against marked lines inside. These markings told priests, officials, and insomniac night watchers what hour it might be, even when Sirius, the star of stars, was hidden behind clouds, or when temple corridors swallowed up all light. Here's the mainstream fact. The earliest Egyptian water clocks we know of date back to around 1500 BCE, roughly the same period as those sundials you just stood beside. They were especially handy for night rituals in temples. Imagine a sleepy priest yawning at 2 a.m., needing a reminder that it was time to light incense before the god's statue. But the quirky tidbit you probably didn't expect is that some of these clepsydras were decorated like little cosmic charts. One example, found at Karnak, has markings that don't just divide hours, they show which stars should be overhead when the water reached that level. So not only did you have a clock, you basically had an ancient star app carved into clay. Forget there's an app for that, there was a pot for that. Historians still argue whether Egyptians cared about precise equality between hours. Their hours weren't like ours, standardized and unchanging. Instead, hours in summer stretched long and lazy, while winter hours shrank to short stints. Was it about actual time, or just about keeping rhythm with nature's moods? Some scholars insist they sought accuracy. Others think it was symbolic, a ritual calendar of water and stars. Stand here with me and listen. The drip, drip, drip echoes like a heartbeat in the stone chamber. You can almost feel your own breath sinking with it, slower and slower, until it's hard to tell where your lungs end and the jar begins. Each droplet feels like an announcement, another moment has passed. But don't hurry, there are countless more to come. It's a pace that doesn't care about emails or alarms, just the faint splash, the steady rhythm of a river distilled into liquid seconds. Imagine yourself as a guard at the temple gates. Your shift is long, the night sky vast, and your eyes grow heavy. Instead of glancing at your watch, you shuffle into the chamber, light a torch, and squint at the water level. The priests told you, when the water drops to the third line, ring the gong. So you do, slowly, reluctantly. The gong reverberates into the sleeping city. Somewhere, a scribe notes that time has moved on, and you wonder if anyone is really awake to care. Of course, things go wrong. The water sometimes evaporates in the desert heat, or worse, froze during a freak cold night. What then? You're stuck with a broken clock, staring at a bowl of stubbornly unmoving water. You might laugh to yourself, of course my shift breaks down on the one time I actually need it. Some problems never change. The chamber is cool, the walls damp in places, and if you close your eyes, you can almost imagine the slow trickle as a lullaby. Somewhere far above, the stars rotate across the sky, oblivious to your watery countdown. It's strange to think about, this desire to pin down something as slippery as time with something equally slippery, like water. Yet somehow it worked. You run a hand over the jar's rim, the clay smoothed by centuries, and you realize this wasn't just technology, it was comfort. The priests needed reassurance that even in darkness, time hadn't abandoned them. The slow dripping meant continuity, a reminder that rituals could be trusted to fall into place. So you linger there, breathing evenly, waiting for the next droplet, knowing that when it falls, you're one moment closer to stepping outside and tilting your head to the stars, where another kind of Egyptian timekeeping waits to guide you.
You step outside again, leaving behind the echo of dripping water, and the night air greets you like a soft blanket. Overhead, the Egyptian sky stretches wider than you expect, a velvet expanse scattered with stars. Out here, time doesn't trickle in jars or crawl across sundial stones. It blazes above you in constellations. Your eyes trace the river of the Milky Way, and somewhere to the east you spot Sirius, the star the Egyptians watched like a nightly heartbeat. Here's your mainstream fact. Sirius, the brightest star in the sky, was central to Egyptian calendars. Each year, its heliacal rising, when it appeared just before dawn, signaled the coming of the Nile's flood. That single astronomical event was basically their New Year's Eve. The moment farmers perked up, priests announced, and scribes sharpened their reed pens. Forget confetti and champagne. Egypt celebrated with irrigation ditches and baskets of grain. But the quirky tidbit you might not expect is that some Egyptians thought of Sirius almost as a celestial cow. Yes, really. Linked to the goddess Hathor, often depicted as a cow or cow-headed figure, the star became a kind of heavenly udder dripping nourishment down to the Nile Valley.
The stars are still bright when you rise again, brushing sand off your tunic and stretching your back. Tonight, though, instead of temples and polished priests, you wander into the fields, where life is timed not by sun shadows or star risings, but by something altogether earthier: cows. Yes, the humble cow, lowing softly in the distance, turns out to be one of the best clocks in ancient Egypt. You walk down a dirt track and hear the slow clop of hooves. In the dim light, you see farmers guiding their herds back to pens. The rhythm is unhurried, predictable, almost as steady as that water clock drip you left behind. Egyptians didn't need spreadsheets to plan their day. They had livestock habits, and those habits never skipped a beat. Here's the mainstream fact. Cattle were the backbone of Egypt's agricultural economy. They weren't just food sources. Their daily routines helped structure farm life. When the cows were led to pasture in the early morning, it meant the day's work had begun. When they returned at dusk, weary and heavy with milk, it signaled the end. Farmers looked at the herd the way you might glance at a clock face. Ah, the cows are restless, must be nearly noon. And here's your quirky tidbit. Egyptians sometimes used cattle count as a form of taxation record. A king's wealth could be measured by the number of cattle he owned, tallied during great cattle counts that doubled as national censuses. So, in a strange way, your daily timetable was also a tax form. Imagine an official arriving at your farm, clipboard in hand, and saying, "Nice herd. Also, time to pay up." Nothing like a government cow clock to keep you awake. Historians still argue whether farmers truly organize their days primarily around livestock, or whether this is just a romantic idea we moderns project backward. Some scholars suggest farmers relied more on bells or signals from overseers in fields, while others argue that the animals' stubborn regularity made them the most reliable reminder of when to get moving. The debate lingers, like the faint smell of dung in the barnyard air. You watch as a young herdsman pats the flank of a cow, guiding it toward the pen. The cow lumbers slowly, chewing grass, unbothered by the rising night chill. Around you, the chorus of animals fills the air, bleating goats, honking geese, braying donkeys. The whole soundscape is a rural symphony, and each note carries a kind of time stamp. The donkeys bray loudest in the early dawn. The geese squabble near midday. By evening, the cow's lowing turns into a background hum that blends with crickets. The scent of hay mixes with the faint sweetness of date palms. You picture yourself as a weary farmer, rising before the sun, not because your phone alarm went off, but because the cows were already awake and mooing loud enough to rattle your nerves. You trudge out barefoot, tie up the oxen, and realize time is measured not by devices, but by chores waiting to be done. The cows are hungry, therefore it is morning. Honestly, it's a foolproof system, though not one that allows for sleeping in. It strikes you as funny. Today people complain about their cat pawing at them at 5 a.m., but 3,000 years ago, your entire work schedule depended on an animal's stubborn stomach. You chuckle. Sorry, boss, I'm late. The cow overslept. Somehow you doubt the overseer would buy that excuse. A breeze carries the smell of fresh dung, sharp and earthy, and you wince slightly. Ancient Egypt was not glamorous on the ground level, but even this smell is a kind of timekeeper. Fresh dung meant morning, when animals were driven out. Drying dung told you the day was halfway gone. By night, the air grew clearer, the scent fading as animals settled. It's as though every sense, sight, sound, and smell, contributed to your awareness of hours. You squat by the pen, running your hand through the dust. The cows settle into rhythmic chewing, tails swishing lazily. Their predictability is oddly comforting. No ticking clock, no glowing digits, just the sound of breath and cud, a rhythm older than pyramids. And as you lean back against the wooden fence, you realize how this system anchored daily existence. Hours weren't abstract, they were alive, mooing and shuffling around you. It's the kind of timekeeping you can feel in your bones, slow and steady, demanding patience. And while you're tempted to close your eyes and drift off with the herd, the story isn't finished yet. Ahead, a far more elaborate clock waits, the strict, sunlit schedule of the pharaoh himself.
The cows fade into the distance, their lowing softening like background static, and you find yourself walking toward the shimmering gates of the royal palace. Dust settles beneath your sandals as you step into a world where time is not just about shadows and animals, but about ceremony, politics, and an exhausting calendar of duties. Welcome to the pharaoh's daily schedule, a life so precisely arranged by the sun's journey that you might need a nap just thinking about it. First, the mainstream fact. Pharaohs, especially in the New Kingdom, had highly ritualized days that revolved around religious and administrative duties. At sunrise, the ruler was expected to participate in morning temple rites, presenting offerings to gods, reaffirming divine favor, and ensuring the kingdom's harmony. Imagine starting your morning not with coffee, but with chanting priests, incense smoke, and the pressure of literally keeping the universe in balance. No pressure. Here's the quirky tidbit. Sources suggest the pharaoh's morning routine also included being ritually washed and dressed by attendants. We're talking several layers of linen, elaborate jewelry, and yes, even cosmetics. Picture the ruler sitting there, stone-faced, while a servant delicately applies eyeliner thicker than any Instagram influencer could dream of. You can almost hear Pharaoh muttering, "A little more coal on the left, please. I've got an audience with Amun today." Historians still argue whether pharaohs genuinely followed such rigid schedules every day, or whether these accounts were more ceremonial ideals recorded by scribes. Some scholars say the ruler probably skipped a few rituals now and then, especially if he was busy with war or political drama. Others believe the daily rhythm was non-negotiable, since the pharaoh's presence in rituals symbolized cosmic order. Either way, you're left picturing the tension, a monarch torn between paperwork and sacred eyeliner duty. As you shuffle through the palace corridors, the air cool and heavy with incense, you notice the order of things. Guards bow stiffly, courtiers whisper like a hive of bees, scribes scurry with scrolls under their arms. Every action is carefully timed. Midday brings audiences with officials, petitions from weary farmers, and long recitations of taxes collected from villages. You imagine Pharaoh stifling a yawn, nodding sagely, and occasionally thinking, "Why didn't I stay in bed with my eyeliner on?" Beyond the throne room, the palace kitchens buzz. Cooks prepare elaborate meals at predictable times, roasting duck, baking bread, pouring beer into jars. Their schedule is as clock-like as any sundial. Breakfast offered after morning rites, lunch served between audiences, supper timed to the final prayers at dusk. You lean in to sniff the air and catch a whiff of honey cakes. Suddenly, you realize this is the best part of the pharaoh's schedule. No wonder the gods were always offered food first. By late afternoon, the palace becomes quieter, the sun casting golden rectangles across tiled floors. Officials retreat, petitions fade, and the pharaoh is led again to temple courtyards, where shadows stretch long against walls carved with stories of gods and kings. You step closer, feeling the heat of the stone as the ruler raises hands in prayer. The sun is setting, and with it, the day's balance must be reaffirmed. If he misses this, people believe chaos might creep in. That's a lot of pressure for someone still digesting honey cakes. And as night falls, the schedule doesn't entirely stop. Evening banquets, music, dancing, and performances might fill the hours. Harp strings plucked softly, dancers swaying, servants pouring wine. It's less about partying and more about displaying royal power, though to you it feels like a well-earned wind-down. Imagine yourself there, yawning discreetly as musicians play the same soothing tune they played the night before and the one before that. Ancient playlists had no shuffle button. You lean against a cool column, watching the ruler glide through this daily machinery of ritual and repetition. The hours of Pharaoh's life aren't his own. They're stitched together by religion, politics, and expectation. You feel a little sympathy. Even kings couldn't ignore the clock. The difference was, their clocks weren't just sticks in the sand or dripping jars. Their clock was the entire kingdom, ticking along to the steady movement of the sun. You close your eyes briefly, the scent of incense wrapping around you like a blanket, the low hum of conversations drifting past. And in that moment, you realize the irony. Pharaoh's schedule was designed to keep the cosmos orderly, but to you, it feels like the perfect recipe for a nap.
The palace halls fade into silence, and when you open your eyes again, you're no longer among courtiers and incense smoke, but in the open air, walking along dusty paths where the stone cliffs of Thebes rise around you. Here, the workers toil in quarries and at temple sites, chiseling blocks, hauling loads, and leaving behind the thunder of hammers echoing against limestone. And even in this clamor, time is marked, this time by bells, shouts, and the rhythm of labor itself. Here's your mainstream fact. In the New Kingdom, construction projects were monumental affairs, often employing thousands of workers at once. These men didn't have personal sundials dangling from their belts. Instead, overseers used sound, horns, claps, even bells to mark the beginnings and pauses of shifts. Imagine a foreman bellowing across the quarry, "Drop your chisels, it's midday!" The roar of the crowd quiets, not because they had wristwatches, but because they trusted the sound signal. Now for your quirky tidbit. Archaeologists have found evidence suggesting that at some temple sites, workers might have used clapping signals with large wooden boards or even hollow jars struck like drums to mark the work rhythm. So instead of a whistle while you work, it was more like a deep, booming thunk, thunk, carrying across the valley. Somewhere out there, the first factory punch clock might just have been a very loud jar. Historians still argue whether these signals were truly standardized or if they were improvised by each overseer. Was there a strict bell system throughout the kingdom, or did it depend on whichever foreman had the loudest voice? Some claim these time cues were rigid and regulated. Others believe they were flexible, more about keeping workers in line than accurately tracking hours. You can picture two historians shaking their heads at each other. "No, it was definitely a bell. No, it was definitely a drum." Meanwhile, the workers back then probably didn't care. They just wanted shade and water. You step closer to the quarry wall. Dust rises in clouds, coating your tongue, making you cough lightly. Men swing mallets, stone chips fly, and above it all, you hear the faint clang of a bell, or the sharp crack of wood. Instantly, chisels drop. The sound of labor halts like a switch turned off. You feel the sudden silence, almost startling after the constant hammering. It's not a Rolex moment, but it's effective. The overseer waves a hand, and workers shuffle to the side, sitting in patches of shade, pulling bread from baskets, drinking water carried in skin bags. This pause is timed, you realize, not by the sun's exact position, but by an audible rhythm that paces the entire workday. It's strangely comforting, knowing the whole site breathes together, labor and rest woven into a single schedule of sound. You chuckle to yourself, imagining a modern office adopting the same method. Instead of calendar alerts, someone just bangs a giant clay pot whenever it's time for lunch. Thud! "Okay, everyone, drop your emails, it's sandwich o'clock." Honestly, it might be less stressful. The workers talk softly as they eat, the murmur blending with the rustle of palm trees. You watch a man wipe sweat from his brow, lean back against the quarry wall, and close his eyes for a few stolen minutes. His body knows the rhythm, the length of a pause, the moment to rise again. He doesn't need to measure seconds. He trusts the bell will call him back. Farther away, you see temple builders in Thebes working by similar cues. Imagine the steady beat of mallets as scaffolding rises, then the deep boom signaling a shift change. All of this noise creates an invisible clock, not seen or held, but heard and obeyed. It's less about minutes, more about collective breath, ensuring the labor of thousands stays aligned. The sun begins to sink, shadows stretching long across the cliffs. Another signal rings out, and the workers shuffle back toward their homes, sandals dragging, tools slung over their shoulders. The site grows quiet, except for the occasional call of a nightbird. You linger for a moment, breathing in the dust and heat, letting the rhythm of their day wash over you. And you realize, whether it's sundials, dripping jars, restless cows, or ringing bells, each method of timekeeping is less about exact seconds and more about keeping people moving together, in harmony.
The quarry fades into dusk now, but the debate over whether Egyptians prized precision or ritual still lingers in the background, waiting to be picked up in the next chapter of your journey.